First, we're going to hear about why NaaS requires standards-based automation throughout the supply chain from Amartus. So for that first presentation, we'll have Michael Kearns, who's also going to be on the panel that's directly following. So I'd like to invite out Michael, please.
Thank you, Greg.
Michael is the co-founder and chief strategy officer at Amartus. So
hello, everybody. Good morning to you. Just for those of you who are at MEF, I suppose you will know Amartus. We have our fingers in a lot of pies. We do a lot of the standards development work. And we also, thank you, we also run the MEF community. And we also do the MEF OIT service. And we're very active in all the different committees here at MEF. But for those of you who don't know about us, we are experts in network and cloud automation software. We help providers and enterprises to actually take the platforms that they've bought and turn them into workable systems for their particular products and service offerings. We work with a global customer base of tier 1 to tier 3 providers and enterprise across the globe. More recently, what we've done is we've focused in the last 5 years. We're actually a 20-year-old company, and actually our birthday is this year. But in the last 5 years, we've really put a lot of emphasis on building up software solutions for the inter-provider automation based around the MEF, LSO, APIs, and processes. And we've established a good customer base whereby yesterday we were awarded the leading solution provider for the most amount of implementations of the LSO, APIs, and processes. But we've always been curious as to, that's wholesale environment between providers. We've always been curious, and curious we are, so we want to know what is happening for the enterprise. How is this all consumed at the enterprise? And today, obviously, in this event over the last couple of days, we're talking about NaaS. And NaaS requires a new automation paradigm. So let me just go to if I could get to this first slide. Let me just point out something that's fundamentally different about today's networks, which changes the whole paradigm of how you manage those networks for the enterprise. And this is even before you consider NaaS, the commercial model aspects and things like that of NaaS. I think automation is the key. So if we have a global enterprise with sites all over the world, we're going to have to now connect them across different provider networks. So our networks that used to be single provider with some static tail circuits are really truly multi-provider networks, where those providers are co-located and interconnected in different areas around the globe. This seems to be a very great flexibility for the network, but for the management, it's actually quite a headache, right? Because each one of those providers now has their own BSS, OSS stacks, and you need to coordinate all the processes across that. And that's why MEF LSO is very important, because that's the means by which you can coordinate and deliver that unified single pane of glass to the customer. We also have a proliferation of service options. So we used to have private fixed line. Now we can have wireless and satellite last mile access. We work with a lot of with satellite companies today. SES and OneWeb are our customers. They're trying to get into the game of offering services to their telco customers via the MEF LSO APIs. We know that there are cloud cores that can now be used to extend your network, to give you an alternative, and there are global backbone providers who are also giving alternatives to your network. So there are now ways to easily extend your network and scale up your network customers as you serve your global customer base without having to roll out your own physical POPs in all the locations, basically. Then we have virtualization, edge compute, network edge, and all of those things. So you can see why this is a fundamental shift. We're now talking about networks which span multiple providers, lots of different variety of segments that can be served by different technologies, and you still have to manage it and give that single unified view, unified set of APIs to the enterprise customer. So if we take that to NaaS and we look at what's the core requirements for managing NaaS and what are the challenges that we have. So the first thing is that NaaS services will be delivered over horizontally integrated networks. And what I mean, a lot of those services that you're using could be internal, but even that group who provides them to you, they're actually not the same group as the enterprise B2B guys who are having to construct these networks for you. So they're a supplier, just in the same way as a third party is a supplier also. So you need to be able to onboard suppliers and their products and services. You need to be able to offer that self-service portals and APIs to negotiate, order, manage, monitor the status of the network. You need to be able to match the NaaS customer network needs to the available supplier services and infrastructure. And you need to be able to order, manage the status of the underlying services with the supplier partners. So when I said earlier, I said there's a new paradigm needed for management here. So let's have a look at what that might look like from a NaaS perspective. So on the left-hand side, we have the NaaS enterprise customer, and they're expecting to be able to do self-service, portals and APIs. They want to be able to register themselves. They want to be able to do network negotiation and operations. They want to do billing. And then in the middle, we have the NaaS provider who's providing that network to the enterprise. And they need to be able to match those customer needs to supplier services. They need to be able to collect and aggregate and report customer network status. They need to be able to roll up the billing and provide billing all the way back from all the different components that make up the enterprise network. And then it's also the responsibility of the NaaS provider to onboard and include the products and services of those providers, each of those suppliers in the supply chain, the infrastructure and service downstream suppliers, and then the billing and settlement aspects as well. So on the right, you see you can have tens, hundreds of different providers, and you better be ready to be able to take advantage. You know, we've seen in some of the sessions yesterday, we talked about edge compute, using MEF-LSO to go out and order edge from lots of different edge providers, because nobody's going to build a global edge footprint, you know, or can do it. So if they're in a particular country, like we do a project with NTT, and they wanted to order edge compute in North America, so they can basically use the MEF APIs to order them from Equinix in that project. So that's an example, but you can have hundreds of those edge providers. So we need to be able to, we could start with a layer 2 connectivity, but we need to be able to expand to all aspects of the network, the overlay, the underlay, the edge compute, everything that you can possibly think of, and be able to manage it from those suppliers. So we take it a little bit further, and we'll have a look and see what does that actually look like then in terms of an architecture for the automation. So on the left, as I mentioned, you have the customer portal for the customer. You have a customer systems, which are BSS, or sorry, the customer systems can be integrated. A lot more enterprise customers, particularly the bigger ones, they don't want to use portals anymore. They have different suppliers. They want to integrate their APIs into an overall systems that they run their enterprise from. And then in the middle, you've got this new component, which is called the inter-party automation. And this is something we've been working towards for a long time, over the past 5 years. And what we've realized is that you need to take a very simplified view for the enterprise customer on the left-hand side, abstract them from all the complexity of what's going on the right-hand side, and be able to take in your requests for what their needs and actually break it down and decompose it into those underlying services that are available to you for the end customer. And then when you've done that, you need to be able to report back to the end customer in a very simplified manner what you've bought. You don't want to tell them about each and every piece that they've actually purchased. You want to tell them, here's the SLA for the multi-hop service going from one location to another. And you need to have all the functions that you would have had in your BSS and OSS. So the matching is the number one goal of this inter-party automation. You might say, a lot of people say, oh, but I have my BSS, I'm an enterprise B2B provider, I have my BSS and I have my OSS, why do I need another component? Well, going back to what I said very early on is that actually, if you consider that networks are more and more multi-provider networks, you have to be able to keep a consistent set of processes. So we talk about APIs, but actually they're really processes aligned almost on a wireline basis with your suppliers. So you need to know exactly what you're asking them for, what you expect to get in the response, and that's the MEF-LSO. All the work we've done in defining the MEF-LSO processes and APIs. So, when you have a BSS and OSS, we talk about digital transformation, and we talk about the digital transformation journey. Well, actually, it's not really a journey, because a journey has a start and an end point, but it's really more of a loop. And you're constantly seeing things that you have to adapt, like when we bring in AI, when we've got edge compute and things we want to take advantage of, we're constantly changing. But the most important part is that we keep a consistent set of processes with those suppliers. And the only way to do that is if you have a consistent set of processes on top of all of these, and you can adapt the new things that you're introducing in your BSS and OSS. And we've learned this from working with our Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 providers who have changed out the underlying systems that they're using. So they might have had one quote system initially, and then they were saying, but we're in a transition to another quote system. And we keep the consistent interface by having these processes up there, and we can bring in we can integrate with the new quote APIs and the new quote capabilities. For the customer, for the supplier, there's no difference, and for the customer, you can maintain that. So it's very important to have this independent layer where you can coordinate across the BSS, OSS of the B2B provider. So I'll just mention some key points here. Okay, so one thing I mentioned earlier is on the customer side, the experience you need to give to that customer has to be based on an abstraction. So we have done some proof of concept here as well, where we're doing with DT and Equinix, and I'll show that on the next slide. But we use intent-based interfaces and natural language way of specifying your requirements. I'll talk a little bit more on that on the next one. But then you need to take it, and as I said, you need to have standard processes and APIs for your suppliers. And MEF-LSO gives us a very good standard. It's a very clearly defined, very specific set of APIs, and that's the difference between MEF and what other standard bodies are actually doing. If you try to do that with other standards bodies, of course we've leveraged the work of other standards bodies, but if you try to do it with other standards bodies, it's a project for each and every supplier, and you can't afford to do that when you have tens and hundreds of suppliers. Onboarding of suppliers, I said that you need to have a smooth process to be able to do that. You need to be able to import their catalogs, because the catalogs will be used by the system to be able to determine availability. You need to be able to import their inventory, their POPs, locations, and things like that, and the pricing, etc. So you need to be able to import that, and you need to have a process for onboarding it into this system. And finally, I talked a lot about the coordination across this. So many suppliers and customers to interoperate with, and going back to the title of this session, it really is only possible, based on our experience, if standardized processes and APIs are used. Otherwise, it's projects with each and every supplier. When you have tens and hundreds, it's not going to work. And you need to make sure it's a life cycle too. So they're going to be updating things. You need to test quickly, get them on board, incorporate their new capabilities. It's not something that you can, spin up lots of projects. It just won't work, basically. So I'd like to take a minute to just talk about the actual project that we had here at MEF Accelerator project. It's called Flat Hammer. We started this project, actually we started working with Deutsche Telekom Group probably 2 years ago, where we were looking at automating ways to improve the automation on their network. So we started with interprovider, and we proved that interprovider works. MEF-LSO APIs work. Then we took a multi-cloud network, and we actually used a multi-cloud network as the transit between those access providers. So we had transit and access, and we looked at that. But earlier this year, we engaged in this project, which was really looking at the enterprise B2B and how we could abstract for the enterprise B2B, so that our target was so that you could go into a portal as an enterprise customer, and just like you would in a travel site, your popular travel site, Expedia or something, say, I would like to go from Bonn to Melbourne. And if I go, what are my options? Can you give me the options? Can you give me a price, an indicative price for this? And then you would say, I want to get a firm quote from the prices. So you could go back and forward, you could do your own filtering just like you can do on Expedia. And then finally, you can issue the order. And so in this case, we used a reference network. We worked with Equinix, and we had an option to expand the DT network using the AWS cloud, which was abstracted into a Layer 2 service. And we were able to demonstrate, and you can see this at the innovation stands outside. You can see it at the MEF Accelerator later today. And we were able to demonstrate that on the right-hand side, each and every one of those providers you could negotiate with each and every one of those providers using the MEF LSO APIs. We did have to do the adaptation to Equinix and AWS from that into their own APIs. But effectively, what we were doing is protecting the middle piece, which is the enterprise B2B provider's inter-party automation solution. So making sure that all that stuff that's different gets pushed to the extremities. And on the left-hand side, as I mentioned, the enterprise customers really getting a very simplified view of the world and how they do it. So we plan to take this project further because we also have been one of the first companies in MEF to introduce a production running system for operational APIs around performance management with one of our customers, SES Satellite Company. And we plan to take all of those operational APIs into this so that you now have a consistent set of business APIs and also operational APIs. So in summary, the NaaS service will be based on horizontally integrated enterprise networks. NaaS customers expect self-service portals and APIs. APIs more important now than ever, especially for the large enterprise. We hear more and more we don't want another portal because we need to have people who can go into those portals. NaaS providers need standards-based inter-party automation. I think it's a fundamental thing. We know automation, we talked about it over these past few days. And it needs to be able to match, negotiate, translate, and operate NaaS customer networks and underlying services. MEF has done a fantastic job with all the members and community whom we work with to offer those inter-party automation standards. And Amartus has really taken it and worked alongside, and really we iterate and bring these capabilities into our orchestration so we can really prove that this works. The MEF Accelerator is a really excellent way to do that. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Thanks.